Hi. Yeah, as I heard, Mario could not make it today because we are. It's not unfortunate, but we are busy with one project in Santiago, and so I'm going to present the work of our office, or some of the work, and really I really enjoyed the topic of resource, because I think again it kind of applies to the way or the methodology of how we work and how we look at things. As we're really interested in all the boring things that really make architecture, the legal frameworks, the economy behind it, all these kinds of things that everybody wants to leave out in a way. And so we decided to actually make this an installation for this, not just show our work, but actually show how we work, and came up with this installation. And we're faced with a dilemma. We're always looking for dilemmas in a way, kind of difficult things. Even if things are easy, we create a difficulty. But this was the room that, the space that was available to us, and how could we actually fill that while at the same time not being placed or based in New York? The only thing we could actually resourcefully bring here is that 40 by 23 by 55 centimeters, 50 pounds. And so even though we work with the models all the time, with large models, there was absolutely no way that we could bring them over. And instead, so we came up with something which was, I was looking at this Hogard, which I really like, and said, okay, well, if we can't bring all this stuff, we can only bring tiny things. We would bring actually the equivalent to these little figures and create these large monsters that would fill the space. And so the little figures turned out to be these here. Each of those is a 3D printed object containing 3 of our projects, and if the light is cast onto it, they create as a shadow image the icons of our work. So basically, within these 4 little things is 6 years of work. That's all we did. Lazy. So here we go. So we call our piece global economy. You know, we're talking of resources, and every time people talk about resources, at the end of the day, they start to talk about the global economy. We started with that topic right away. And so while these globes actually are very specific, they were just like, engineered, and with the help of several people, and a professor from India, and a German teaching at the in Switzerland, they were fabricated here. The rest of the exhibition is actually really low key. We shopped for it at IKEA. This is Freck, or part of Freck, the mirror, the scissor mirror of IKEA. So the idea being actually be really resourceful, buy the stuff off the shelf, bring it here in one suitcase, and unfold it and fill the whole space. So here we go. These are the lamps that are used by DJs to kind of spotlight events. These are rotating these motors for disco balls, hour balls, the little weight from construction sites, and the mirror that I talked about. All of that wired on the wall. It's a very simple thing. So unfold the suitcase, that's what comes out of it. And so, then suddenly the whole space is played upon. You see the piece on the left. So here are the changing icons of all our projects. Some of them I'm going to introduce, and of course we're doing a little bit of advertisement for who we are in the background. But the interesting thing to us is kind of where things come together, the kind of economy in the larger sense of word, the economy that drives architecture. I'm not talking about the money only, but all these kinds of things, the legal frameworks, the financial things, and also particularly our setup, which is obviously a topic here, kind of being dispersed around the world, Skyping with all these people in our office that I've never met in person. But all these kinds of things are really interesting to us. And so suddenly how something quite atmospheric also and emerges out of it that doesn't seem to be really contained within this like pseudo-rational logic that we apply. And the idea of the shadow, again, talking about resources, this is a very small scale of a project, but the idea of the shadow or shading, something that also interested us for a while now, and on a very different scale though, because together with Rebecca Sternberg from Tel Aviv, we've been working on a project called Urban Shading, introducing or looking into shading actually as an urban infrastructure. That is something that could we actually take this idea of like turning things around, having the image, the shadow image first, and like re-engineer the object from it. Could we actually also apply that on a very different scale, the scale of the city, like especially like at zones like closer to the equator with a high exposure of the sun? Could we think about that we don't design the building first, but design the cast shadow first as the kind of thing that actually threads the city together, instead of thinking of the buildings as like these individual icons that we see all the time? And so these were like initial early on exercises or diagrams and like figuring out this is one city block in Tel Aviv actually. You see it during the different times of the day, and just seeing actually how interestingly the configuration, the actual movable space in the summer, the shaded space actually changes over the course of the day and kind of creates very different routes through the city. So the resource of just taking ideas from scale to scale. So in the evening. And ultimately that then, which is a work in progress, leading to another thing which is thinking about a new kind of regional thing, which like leaves behind kind of the cliches of regional architecture again. But suddenly think about that Tel Aviv and Tripoli, Isfahan in Iran, curiously enough, one region, or San Diego, Mexicali, all these places, because what they share is they're in 32° north, and therefore have a very, very, very similar climate condition. So now that we're at the city scale, next to, I mean, the city as the thing that has been founded a long time ago as actually a kind of a refugee, a place of security, you know. Suddenly, the way we think about it more often actually happens to be a kind of a resource of fear. I mean, the environmental threat, the security threat. I mean, we see that all over the place. This is the American embassy in London. And so I don't care about the building right now. What I do care about is the 30-meter blast zone. This is the relationship of that building to the city, and this is kind of the city, the urban environment that actually comes as a result of it. So we were actually invited by the German government for a competition with 5 other offices to design the new German embassy in Belgrade in Serbia. And so we're looking into the idea of what is actually their the idea of security, or the kind of constraints that come about, that suddenly come together in that one very building typology, a kind of place that wants to represent a country that's very open, at the same time is highly segregated. And so as a resource, we looked into not so much architectural references, but we looked into the very materials materials and technologies from the security sector, and found actually quite some interesting things to work with. This is an aluminum foam after blast, and this aluminum foam absorbs the energy of a bomb blast. This here is a so-called blast curtain, a thing that kind of catches all these splinters of glass and debris after a bomb went off. And these are these kind of PCM cushions lining all sorts of trash cans. Pretty much every trash can you see in an airport in the US at this point looks like this from the inside. And the interesting thing, why we came across that, is we got a brief for the project. It was 1 page on the architectural program and 50 pages on security. So it makes you wonder a little bit. So like, who cares about this program? But all they care about, and they come to a conclusion after 50 pages, it was 50 centimeters of solid concrete in front of the building in the middle of the city. Well, I can't quite sign up to that attitude of a building towards the urban environment. It's quite tricky. But what we found in all these things, which I just showed, is that they're actually quite amazing materials to work with. They're highly performative in that sense, but suddenly they develop, if you think about them in a different way, they develop a beauty that's actually quite interesting. So we came up with that concept of friendly fortification. On the left, the blast curtain, the kind of homely material, which actually is saves your life. this is the aluminum foam. You know, we know all of these offices that would love to use that material, but here suddenly there's a reason. And these are these PCM cushions that suddenly create this incredibly beautiful lighting, especially with the Russian green in front of it. So this is the project. Just following that material logic, the kind of, or the logic so inherent to that building typology, kind of bringing together means of security into like something that cannot, like the early image of the American embassy, can be separated by the 30-meter blast zone from the street edge. So it creates that that aesthetic, which to me looks more like a Prada store than an embassy, which is probably problematic in a certain way. But I was quite intrigued that these highly performative materials suddenly would create this really surprising aesthetic. And this was another drawing that we produced for the competition. We did not win. But there's again, there is the history to that. It's not this is not a vague kind of unknown thing. There's a whole story to that. This is Joseph Gandhi's rendering of the Bank of England, Sohn's building. And so there's something quite intriguing, because that Serbia project is not the only one. Germany right now in that case is like rebuilding every embassy in the Middle East because they're so panicky. And so basically what they imply in that they see that there is another side to the building, which is the post-explosion one. You know, so the one, this is one side of the reality. This is an implied reality in the building, so we should design it in a way. And so the Sohn building, and this is the context we were really dealing with. This is the way it looks right now. This is Serbia. This is one street down from our side. This is still the NATO bombing from around 10, 12 years ago. It's a quite amazing piece of architecture, actually. Many of the ones that were bombed, the NATO had some architecture critics on board, I think. So here we go. So this is the makeup of the building. The whole thing, you see the facade unfolded or unlayered. I'm not going to go into detail into this. And the second side to it was actually, so now that we've actually created through this friendly fortification a certain visual openness to the building and welcoming nature to it, even inside the building, you know, you're given all these kind of office cubicles and so on. But what is it ultimately that makes up a building, an embassy, if it's supposed to be successful? And what we cared about wasn't less the gray thing, the matter, but this one thing, the leftover, that kind of communication zone that kind of completely runs through the project. So this is a model shot of that final model that we produced that shows all these kind of different zones of informal communication, but also formal events, because half of the life there is according to certain protocols. So you can kind of nicely play out all these kinds of events, all these kind of scales of openings and some receptions imaginable. A couple of images from that space. Looking up. Close-up of the material. So this is we get your visa renewed at the consulate. So another one, I mean, the first association we all get with the topic of resource is obviously environmental. So this is a photo that I took at a train station somewhere, I think, on a trip to Germany at the time. They were all talking about, okay, we have to re-clad the buildings, they have to be insulated better, and so this is the one and only way the public was able to conceptualize, or is at this point, conceptualize architecture. You know, it's all about the performance aspect, so how much do we lose, how much do we gain in terms of environmental energy or heat. But I found that highly problematic because there's no other layer to discuss architecture, and it's really taken out of a context into kind of a pseudo-mathematical or scientific concept. But what I found really interesting, I think it's beautiful, that kind of false color image. So I thought, okay, why don't we create a building that does exactly that? So we came, a client of ours in Rancagua in Chile came at the very moment, and he was, strange enough, he's a French winemaker in Chile, and he was approaching us for a house, but he couldn't really specify anything about it except for that it needs to be really working well with the environmental aspects, but nothing he could say about how he wanted to live with his wife, with his children, or anything. So he had absolutely no opinion on that. So I thought, well, that comes handy. We just have something that we would like to explore anyways for a second, and then see how that actually drives the rest. So the house and heat. So what we did is the regular residence, a residential project with all the heat sources distributed through the house. We took all of those, thickened up the kind of outer skin and plugged all of those into like a shield. You have to imagine there's like a high sun coming into this, and then leaving all the rest of the house completely openable to the outside. And then the outside would, instead of having, would actually be covered with the chromatic color that actually reflects then the kind of use of all these heat sources. You don't see someone showering in there. You don't see the use of the kitchen, but the facade changes during the different times of the day and the different times of the season according to all the pattern of usage involving heat, because that's what they all do. And the other thing is then on the open space, suddenly instead of tempering the whole space, which is the common practice, we only temper that one bottom surface with the PCM, and so suddenly you would have create kind of a very differentiated surface of where you could be. So at different times of the day, these surfaces that you can lie, sit on would have appropriate comfort levels. So the top view of the house with just the shading patterns during the day. So the house is a basic, very primitive building in a sense, in a nice way, I think. So it's a A-frame with two bridges in there. One of them is the master bedroom, one of them are the kids' bedrooms. The rest is just one open space. So a couple of sections through it, through these heat pockets. You see the rest, bathrooms, the pool, the kitchen, the master bedroom. The children's bedrooms. And so these are the drawings that we gave to our environmental engineer. We said this is the floor plate actually, and we kind of differentiated and developed for the different times of the year and the different times of the day a kind of a pattern of what kind of temperatures we needed for them to be comfortable to do certain things, you know, knowing that this is kind of the breakfast site that works well because there's early in the morning there's no shading there and so on and so on. And based on that he had to engineer basically the layout of the PCM and of the heating pipes and cooling pipes and so on. So again, the question becomes also how do you actually involve these people with you, because we as an architect, we're only like one little part of a larger game within which it's a really important part of how to integrate a wider body of knowledge in this. And again, the other thing that came to mind, this is Hans Hake's condensation cube that he actually did here for New York, I think the first time. And I was really intrigued by the idea of, okay, you have this plastic cube, you have a little bit of water, and then suddenly it sensors, it plays with the different atmospheres within and without, outside. And so I decided instead of, well, we talked to the client about it because it seemed a really quite far-reaching implication in the first idea, but basically the showers and bathrooms are basically not curtained away or walled away, but instead we had the climate engineer reverse engineer it so that as soon as you switch on the shower and in the heat pocket with the shower suddenly develops a higher higher temperature, then the whole thing fogs away and the privacy suddenly happens through the climate change between the two rooms. Through the floor plans. A couple of images of the house, of the model. And again, the resource, right? We're not really interested in reinventing the wheel. I think that's not particularly smart. But we're actually most interested in really working with finding or tapping into all sorts of resources that are out there. And again, the A-frame is in particular a smart building typology, building typology that I think it's worthwhile to look into a bit more careful. Oops, where am I time-wise? Okay. This is a project LA. And we continue on the topic of heat and temperature. And look, this is This is addressing, it's a speculative project together with Ilaria Mazzoleni, a co-teacher of mine from SciArc. And we're looking at the Hollywood Hills, to be precise, at the zip code 90068. And we all know these kinds of images from certain times of the summer when we see them during the news when the wildfires hit. And what's interesting, what's important to look at is that while we are the climate predictions for LA that say that the summers are going to get hotter and the winters are going to get wetter. That's really has a lot of implications for the hills, for the foothills altogether, because during the summer it's going to be rougher with the wildfires, and during the winter the mudslides are going to be more intense. So you can choose which disaster you settle for. But I mean, both of them are devastating. While everybody knows about it, the hills are still populated. You know, all the housing goes up the hills, and so we were wondering about these kind of this condition and how LA actually, how there would be a strategy for a city like LA to deal with it. Again, it's a speculative project, but there's something that struck me as quite interesting about LA. It's what I call the LA Trinity. On the one hand, it's a close to paradisical climate condition. I mean, you know, spending some time in Germany, going to LA is heaven. But at the same time, the cultural predisposition in a way that everybody thinks you can, even though it's close to that last little bit to perfection, we can change. You know, it might be the body, it might be the lawn, it might be anything, but anything is up for change and for grabs. So that's the second part. And the third part is then to have the media around to kind of propagate that to the rest of the world. And so I think if you take these three things, you cannot look at a landscape as only a natural thing, but exactly under the premise of these three. Well, we all know these art pieces. They're all kind of addressing the way of life in the hills. And so this is a crude rendering of that condition, but it's these windy roads going up the hills with these houses separate from one another. And again, a scene from there, from the case study houses. And again, this is what I was describing before. This is the reality those of us not spending time in LA, that's the thing that we hear or see about it. This is the I think the 2007 fire shown, and this is the zip code 90068 with 30,000 inhabitants, many of which live quite far up the hills. And so you see, this is continue. Well, this the key sign, the Hollywood Hills sign, depicted by Rusha, and there's something quite interesting. This is the third element of the trilogy I'm introducing. What he says about it. So the idea of the Hollywood sign, he talks about it. At the end, it doesn't even mean landmark to me. It might as well fall down. That's more Hollywood, to have it fall down or be removed. But in the end, it's more Hollywood to put it back up. So, all right. So if we say that all the houses that you see that creep up the foothills up to this point, and they can't be sustained for these 30,000 people actually up in there in the 90068, we actually take them down and actually take the sign down, rescale it, and basically have these 30,000 units in there. And basically massively, you cannot live next to the sign, which everybody wants coming to LA. You live inside the sign. And at the same time, you evacuate the hill. You finally, in a drastic way, separate the grown environment from the built environment. And then in the most mediated piece of LA, the one thing that is always shown to the rest of the world, so giving that as a means of distributing that further. So it doesn't really matter that it's just this one side, but it's the thing that is actually distributed. So the condition before, condition after, the windy roads, and this is it, the wildfires. All right, this is a project called the Wall House. The first project we built. It's a residence in, I forgot the name you call it. It was somewhere between suburbia and rural. So okay, this is classic rural territory. I know it looks in all the publication. It looks as if it's in the nowhere in the boonies. It's not. It's actually quite interesting land division typology. Lots may not be subdivided smaller than 50,000 square feet. I mean, for New York, Manhattan standards, it's pretty large, I guess. But so you can basically the idea is that people have a kind of suburban lifestyle, but at the same time also do farming. This used to be a farm field before these clients bought. But it's the other interesting thing which struck me as really weird when I first looked at it is once these people move there. The first thing they do, even before they build, they grow these huge hedges around the site to completely separate themselves from the immediate surrounding and create this idea, we're not rural, but we're rural. And the only thing you see in the far distance are the Andes, and you have no neighbors anymore. So how could you argue that this is your lot? I think this is the largest room in your house, once you put this up. So we have the first wall up. It's the hedge. And if the first wall is up, it's kind of impossible for me to just say, okay, well, now we have this huge 50,000 square feet room, and then we place a little house in there, and the rest of it becomes, I don't know, a soccer field or whatever, which actually literally many of those are. But instead we said we follow that logic and just do wall layer after wall layer and just like start peeling them away from one another so that the hedge only is conceptually the outermost layer, and in between those layers slip all the different rooms of the house. So these were really early conceptual models. You see these different layers, the shelving, the glass, and the fabric. We'll go to that in a second. So, as I said, we created a house that instead of designing in plan, it was a sequence of different atmospheric or environmental conditions from the inside out. The innermost one, the most private part, it's actually a concrete core. The bathrooms are in there. It's the wet zone. It's completely tiled. It's very dark and very recessed from the outside. The next layer is a series of glass of shelves. At the same time, they're the storage of a house, kind of going full circle from the modernist villa that left the attic away but never added anything to put your stuff into. So here you go, there it is, and it has a second story too. So it's a structure, as you see, as well as it's a storage of the house. But it's not so much a storage, also it's kind of the means of personalizing. This is where you show who you are, what your stuff is, and so on. So I think the shelving and all of this is really important part of living. The third layer, which is actually let's say the environmental barrier, it's a polycarbonate, translucent polycarbonate panels, and in certain areas, in 2 of the rooms are completely bleed outside, it's full-sized glazing. And the last one, which looks very solid here, is not very solid though. It's a fabric that covers the whole thing up. It's a tent, it's a material that's normally used in greenhouse construction. There's aluminum strips woven into it, and it reflects the sunlight back out. So if you have 45 degrees Celsius, you calculate what Fahrenheit that means. In the summer, you suddenly get a very nicely shaded environment without the harsh sunlight, without all the little insects, and you're still outside. So again, from the inside out, the core. So this is what I was talking about. It's very recessed. It's very dark. It's this wet zone, completely covered in tile. The second layer within the perimeter of the shelving and the structure. This shelving structure, again, this is a really low-budget project, talking about resource. This house was $100,000, and Chile is not dirt cheap. Especially since I feel we built it twice because we had them rip out every single piece at least once. But so this is plywood, construction grade plywood, and above that these are foam boards that they use for concrete pouring. I mean, you can't get cheaper than that. But the interesting thing, it's already finished. You don't have to treat it at all. It's ready to go. So you have the unfold of the shelves. You see the space, the kitchen. It's all very open. All the personal items you see everywhere. The above, the studio above. And then the space now in between the shelves and that polycarbonate skin. The polycarbonate skin you see here, it has all these air pockets inside. And so it has a really good insulation value, believe it or not. But the interesting thing is that's one of the two materials that we brought to Chile. In that case, we brought it there from Germany. And as a matter of fact, we didn't found an architecture office till a short time ago. We were an import-export company for the longest time. So that's another issue of resource. How do you stay alive when you do what you do? So we were trying to sell polycarbonate in South America. Don't ask me if it worked out. So the unfold, the in-between space, the walk-in closet in this case, the bathroom you see on the right. Again, everything is very open in this. And so now we're, you see again, at many points in the house you see the depth. There is, there's an incredible depth, between the outside landscape, the Andes, and the immediate space in front of you, looking through these different layers and climate zones. From the living room to the dining. This is within the living room, the glass completely opens up. And that's the final layer, the fabric that I was talking about, with the aluminum strips woven into. If you ever fly into, let's say, I think Holland for that case, I mean, you fly into Amsterdam, everything, all these greenhouses, that's all what they're covered with. It's dirt cheap and quite efficient in what it does, and beautiful, mostly. So you see the unfold. So this is the space that emerges, this kind of in between. It's outside. I mean, in between. It's outside climate-wise. It's shaded though. You don't have the insects and so on. So there's a whole the living room, the eating area are completely opening up to it. And so left with the question of how do you ever leave this? I mean, obviously we have to go full force. So instead of doors, there's zippers like in a tent. Just zip it open. You walk in or out. So a couple of views. You see how at different times of the day it changes. It was quite interesting to see when we were building the thing. I mean, you have to imagine everything around it was did not look like that, at least. And so the first time we suddenly had this concrete core up, so they were thinking we're putting high-rise up there because the only time they see concrete cores is high-rise. So okay, so suddenly no, it's going to be residence. So then they see this shelves up there, the wood shelves, and nobody knew what to make out of that. It seemed really odd. So that was a little bit a point of confusion, but then we clad it with the translucent material, so that everybody called it the glass house. That people were stopping by, it's the glass house. Just when they got used to that, the tent came over. They were really confused, more so than we were. So here you see it again. And again, resource. It was really interesting. The question, how do you build with materials that are actually, I mean, how do you build between two different economies? On the one side, you have a country like the US or Germany, building materials that are highly developed. You can get pretty much anything you want, put in by anybody you want at any quality you want. At the same time, you're building in Chile, where a crane costs 100 times more than having 100 people on your job site. So the resource, suddenly we had to come up with something that could be delivered by manual labor only and be put together do-it-yourself. This house is completely do-it-yourself, except for really, really few things, which is the construction of the shelf elements themselves, because it's an earthquake zone, as we all know now. And this had to be absolutely rigid, no futzing around. But you see, this is the only time ever we rented a larger tool for the house. It is really expensive. Broke their neck. So this is the moment where the whole shelving, the whole wood structure was up. I think it's actually quite beautiful as just this strange clad object in the landscape. So here we're in the moment of putting the polycarb up. Again, resource. What's the one material that everybody could work with? I mean, you have to imagine these people working on the job site, they would mow your lawn or wash your car the next day or the day before. They had absolutely no construction crews. They were just anybody. So these are the seed channels that you put in a drywall. It doesn't go cheaper, it doesn't go more primitive, and everybody can work with it. They've all done it. And this is my favorite. These are the people who sew the net together, the fabric. Normally they do these pump up jump castles for children. So this is the factory. So this is the guy, he's building a house. And somehow, well, this is a little move, but it doesn't work. For some reason, these animated GIFs seem to not work here. That's okay. Resources. I just came across that 2 weeks ago in an architectural history magazine. I think that's the first wall house. 1932 by Wagner for the so-called growing. It's the so-called growing house. It's quite interesting. It doesn't only have resemblances. I mean, with this kind of translucent outer tilted skin, but also in plan. It's exactly that. It's like an onion. It's like the wall house, layer after layer after layer. It's quite madly so, but 70 years ago, so we were not the first doing this. But I just recently came across, and we're not the first ones, and we're certainly also not the last ones. Well, this was our attempt to benefit from this. Again, resource. How do we build an economy on our work instead of just waiting for the phone to ring? We built this website which was called mywallhouse.com. People could order one. We would customize it to their climate zone, and so on and so on. We're right now building one in the Netherlands, obviously a little bit different from Chile. And then that was early on, and then we teamed out, or we got together with Homeda, which probably many people are familiar with, that we're now integrated all this into, and selling the house there as kind of a basic system that can be customized for different climate zones. But again, as I said, we're not the first one, we're not the last ones. Recently came across this blog entry from a Japanese architecture office that built this just last year. The resemblances are quite interesting. So they also got the in-between, you live between the layers. So this is the living room. I like it. I like that. I really do. We're not obviously not going to sue anybody for using this stuff. I think it's actually great, and architects have a real issue with referencing. So I like it. I've considered a compliment. And this is from a car advertisement in Russia. Land Rover. This is. I mean, you might have seen that. They really painted literally that photo. So this is Natalia on the photo and her dog. But anyway, so we didn't even know about this. Like, someone sent that to us from Russia. I really love it. We tried to get the painting, but they wouldn't sell it to us. Yeah, that was it, I guess. Thank you.